Have you ever watched an old movie so daring, so unfiltered, that you wondered how it was ever allowed to exist? Before the production code clamped down in 1934, Hollywood was a wild frontier. Films explored greed, crime, infidelity, and moral chaos with a shocking openness that terrified censors. These weren't just movies, they were battles for America's soul. Tonight, we dive into 15 pre-code shockers so bold, they forced Hollywood's cleanup. Number 15. Babyface. 1933. When Warner Bros. Released Babyface, it became the scandal that broke the system. The film starred Barbara Stanwyck as Lily Powers, a woman raised in an abusive steel town bar who used manipulation and ambition to climb her way through the corrupt world of New York's business elite. She didn't seek love. She sought power. The story shocked Depression-era audiences with its cynicism. In a time when the nation struggled for hope, Lily's unapologetic rise felt like moral anarchy. Studio executives panicked as state censors called the film indecent and immoral. Cities like Chicago and New York demanded entire scenes be removed. Even the Catholic Legion of Decency branded it a symbol of corruption. Behind the scenes, Warner Bros. Executives were torn between profit and outrage. They released an edited version that replaced the final act's defiance with forced redemption. Yet the damage was done. Lawmakers pointed to Babyface as proof that Hollywood could not police itself. Decades later, historians rediscovered the uncensored cut preserved by chance in a film vault. When it screened at the Library of Congress, it was hailed as a feminist masterpiece born from the ashes of exploitation. What once provoked moral panic now stands as a testament to the power of rebellion before control took over. Number 14. Red-Headed Woman. 1932. Before censors could silence her, Jean Harlow burned through screens like dynamite. In Red-Headed Woman, she played Lil Andrews, a secretary from a poor background who clawed her way into high society using charm and ruthless ambition. Harlow's performance was electric defiant and unapologetically bold. The film was based on a banned novel, and everyone involved knew they were courting trouble. MGM tried to soften the script, but what remained was explosive. Lil didn't pay for her sins, she thrived on them. Audiences gasped as she manipulated men and mocked the moral codes that governed early 30s America. Religious groups called for boycotts. The state of Kansas banned the film entirely, claiming it glorified immorality. But the controversy made it a hit. Lines outside theaters stretched around city blocks as curious audiences came to see what everyone was so outraged about. Behind the scenes, screenwriter Anita Luce fought studio censors, daily refusing to let MGM erase the story's daring edge. Her persistence turned Red-Headed Woman into one of the most pivotal films leading to the creation of the strict Hays Code. Today, it stands as a portrait of a woman who refused to apologize for her ambition, a glittering mirror reflecting the panic of a society terrified of women who couldn't be controlled. Number 13. The Story of Temple Drake. 1933. When Paramount adapted William Faulkner's controversial novel Sanctuary, the result was The Story of Temple Drake, a film so disturbing it nearly ended the era of cinematic freedom. Miriam Hopkins starred as Temple, a young Southern woman whose reckless choices pull her into a world of violence and ruin. The film's tone was suffocating. Its shadows deep, its moral implications terrifying. What had been hinted at in the novel was visualized with shocking frankness on screen. Paramount's executives feared the censors, but released it anyway, hoping controversy would translate into ticket sales. Instead, the backlash was immediate. Critics called it depraved. Civic groups protested theaters. Several states refused to screen it altogether. Church leaders pointed to Temple Drake as proof that Hollywood had lost its moral compass. The outrage was so fierce that the motion picture producers and distributors of America tightened enforcement of the production code within a year. It became the film most often cited by lawmakers demanding regulation. For decades, Temple Drake vanished, locked away by Paramount as if it never existed. When film historians unearthed it in the 70s, they found a haunting artifact, a warning from a time when filmmakers dared to expose the darkness beneath polite society. Its rediscovery reminded viewers why control had become the industry's obsession. Number 12. Scarface, 1932. Howard Hawks and producer Howard Hughes didn't just make a gangster movie with Scarface, they created a cultural earthquake. At the height of Prohibition, when real mobsters ruled the headlines, this film dared to show their world with violent honesty. Paul Mooney's portrayal of Tony Camonte, a ruthless bootlegger modeled on Al Capone, burned across the screen with frightening intensity. Audiences had never seen anything like it. The body count, the machine guns, the total disregard for law and morality made it feel like a documentary from the underworld. Chicago's city board tried to ban it, immediately calling it a recruitment ad for gangsters. State censors from New York to Kansas demanded over a dozen cuts. Even the title Scarface, The Shame of a Nation, was forced upon Hughes as a warning label. Behind the scenes, chaos reigned. Hughes fought censors for months, insisting that America needed to face its own corruption instead of pretending it didn't exist. The original ending, in which Tony dies in a hail of bullets, laughing at the law, was too much for the Hayes office. They forced the studio to reshoot a moralistic ending where he surrenders and faces the gallows. When the film finally opened, the public devoured it. Newspapers called it immoral. Critics called it thrilling. Lawmakers called for change. Scarface became the final straw that convinced Hollywood it could no longer operate without strict moral oversight. Decades later, when Brian De Palma remade it in 1983, he wasn't just paying tribute, he was resurrecting a film so dangerous it changed the rules forever. The original Scarface remains a symbol of freedom's price, a reminder that truth, when too vivid, can terrify the powerful. Number 11. Freaks, 1932. Todd Browning's Freaks was unlike anything audiences had ever seen. Coming off the success of Dracula, Browning used his newfound freedom to craft a story about humanity's cruelty and the real monsters behind beauty. The film followed circus performers exploited and mocked by so-called normal people until they decided to take revenge. The shock wasn't in special effects, it was in the faces of the cast themselves. Browning hired real sideshow performers, including those with disabilities. Audiences expecting fantasy were confronted with reality. Early preview screenings caused walkouts. One woman reportedly fainted. MGM executives panicked. They cut nearly 30 minutes of footage and tried to bury the film under a mountain of shame. Religious groups called it grotesque and blasphemous. Censors in the United Kingdom banned it outright for over 30 years. Browning's career never recovered. He was labeled a madman who had gone too far. The studio pulled Freaks from circulation, calling it a disgrace. Yet over time, its message began to emerge. Beneath the shock was compassion. The so-called freaks were shown as loyal, kind, and brave, while the beautiful villains embodied greed and cruelty. The infamous final scene where they chant "One of Us" became a rallying cry for outcasts everywhere. When it resurfaced in the 60s, counterculture audiences embraced it as a masterpiece. Film scholars hailed it as one of the most important horror films ever made. What once disgusted polite society became an anthem of empathy. Freaks proved that censorship often hides the very truth people need to face. Number 10. Red Dust, 1932. Before the code silenced temptation, there was Red Dust. Set in the steamy jungles of Indochina, this MGM drama paired Clark Gable and Jean Harlow in a tale of passion, power, and survival. It was bold, tropical, and utterly scandalous. Gable played Dennis Carson, a tough plantation owner living in isolation who finds himself caught between two women. One was the glamorous wife of an engineer. The other was Vantine, the brash drifter played by Harlow. Their chemistry was volcanic. What unfolded wasn't romance, it was raw human conflict set against mudstorms and moral decay. Audiences in 1932 were stunned. Critics accused the film of indecency. Religious groups condemned Harlow's character for being too free, too modern, too alive. The Catholic Legion of Decency placed Red Dust on its list of dangerous pictures urging boycotts, but controversy only fed its fame. Behind the scenes, MGM battled local boards who demanded cuts to dialogue and scenes they called improper. The studio reluctantly trimmed portions but refused to destroy the film's daring spirit. It went on to become one of the studio's biggest hits that year, cementing Gable and Harlow as Hollywood's most electrifying duo. Years later, when MGM remade it as Mogambo in 1953, the script was heavily sanitized. What had once been raw was now respectable, yet nothing could erase the memory of the original's danger. Red Dust remains a relic of that fleeting moment when Hollywood still sweated with honesty before moral cleanup drained the heat from its veins. Number 9. She Done Him Wrong, 1933. Mae West was more than a movie star. She was a cultural earthquake. In She Done Him Wrong, she strutted through early sound cinema like she owned it. Playing Lady Lou, the queen of a rowdy saloon in 1990s New York, she turned double entendres into poetry and authority into comedy. The film became one of Paramount's biggest hits, but also one of its most feared creations. Lady Lou was independent, brash, and confident. Men came and went, but she ruled her world with a smile that dared censors to challenge her. When she leaned across a table and said her famous line, "Why don't you come up sometime and see me?" it wasn't just a flirtation. It was rebellion in plain sight. Critics and moralists exploded. Newspapers accused West of single-handedly corrupting American womanhood. The Catholic Legion of Decency held emergency meetings. Women's groups protested theaters. Church leaders called her dialogue vulgar and dangerous. Yet audiences loved her precisely because she broke the rules. The film earned an Academy Award nomination and saved Paramount from bankruptcy. Behind the scenes, chaos unfolded. Censors demanded reshoots and threatened bans in several states. Mae West simply laughed and said she wrote her own dialogue to entertain adults, not children. Paramount executives both feared and adored her because every controversy she caused doubled their profits. But West's success frightened studio heads and lawmakers alike. Her next films pushed boundaries even further until the Hays Code finally came crashing down in 1934. She Done Him Wrong became the final straw that convinced Hollywood to silence its sirens. Decades later, film historians hailed it as the moment when boldness met bureaucracy and lost. Yet Mae West never apologized. She once said she believed in freedom of expression, and she proved it on screen. Her legacy remains that of a woman who looked censorship in the eye and winked. Number 8. The Public Enemy, 1931. Before Al Pacino or Robert De Niro ever held a gun on screen, there was James Cagney in The Public Enemy. Directed by William A. Wellman, this raw gangster drama captured the rise and fall of Tom Powers, a street tough who clawed his way from petty theft to prohibition power. It was violent, fast, and brutally realistic. From its opening moments, the film felt like a warning disguised as entertainment. Viewers saw slums drenched in rain, barrooms filled with smoke, a young man learning that the world rewards cruelty more than kindness. Cagney's performance was volcanic. He didn't play a villain or a hero, but something more dangerous. An ordinary man, molded by corruption. The film's violence shocked audiences. The infamous scene where Cagney shoves a grapefruit into Mae Clarke's face became a national talking point. Critics accused Warner Bros. Of glorifying crime, while police departments called it unpatriotic. Several cities, including Chicago and Detroit, banned the film outright, citing moral decay. Behind the scenes, Warner Bros. Executives faced a storm. They insisted that the film ended with moral punishment to satisfy the censors, but that did little to ease the outrage. Hays' office representatives warned that such movies would destroy public faith in cinema. And yet, The Public Enemy was a massive hit. It captured the anger of the Depression era, when ordinary people saw gangsters as anti-heroes who defied a broken system. Cagney became a star overnight, but success came with a price. The Public Enemy was repeatedly cited in government hearings as proof that Hollywood had gone too far. Its legacy forced studios to tone down violence and glorification of lawlessness. Still, film critics later recognized it as a masterpiece of realism and rebellion. It marked the moment when American cinema stared at its own dark reflection and didn't blink. Number 7. Island of Lost Souls, 1932. Long before modern horror found its voice, there was Island of Lost Souls. Based on H.G. Wells's The Island of Dr. Moreau, it was a nightmare dressed as adventure. Directed by Early C. Kenton and starring Charles Laughton and Bela Lugosi, the film told the story of a scientist who turned animals into humans through forbidden experiments. From its first moments, audiences were uneasy. The jungle setting felt suffocating, the creatures unsettlingly human. Laughton's portrayal of Dr. Moreau was both charming and monstrous. He spoke softly, yet commanded terror, with a whip in hand. What frightened viewers most wasn't the makeup or the beasts. It was the cruelty the film dared to show without apology. Religious leaders called it blasphemous. Critics labeled it indecent. The British Board of Film Censors banned it completely, calling it an affront to human dignity. American censors demanded multiple cuts for cruelty and suggestion of moral perversion. Paramount reluctantly complied, but the controversy never stopped. Behind the scenes, Lawton immersed himself in the character until cast members began to fear him. Reports circulated that extras and the creature makeup were kept isolated to heighten tension. The production became a psychological experiment mirroring the film itself. When it premiered, audiences left theaters shaken. One critic called it the most horrifying film ever made. Paramount pulled the film from circulation after the code crackdown, labeling it too disturbing for re-release. For decades, Island of Lost Souls was nearly impossible to find. When restored in the 90s, it stunned new audiences with its artistry and intelligence. Modern scholars now hail it as a masterpiece that predicted ethical debates about science and humanity. Its haunting chant, "Are we not men?" still echoes as a symbol of pre-code horror's forbidden genius. It dared to ask what separates human from beast, and whether censorship itself was the real act of cruelty. Number 6. The Sign of the Cross, 1932. Cecil B. DeMille was never subtle, and The Sign of the Cross was his most audacious gamble. Released by Paramount during the height of the pre-code era, this biblical epic was both grand and scandalous. It told the story of pagan Rome under Emperor Nero and the persecution of early Christians. On paper, it was moral. On screen, it was shocking. DeMille filled the film with massive sets, torchlit orgies, gladiatorial cruelty, and scenes that left audiences stunned. Claudette Colbert's infamous milk bath scene became one of the most talked about moments in early Hollywood history. For some, it was art. For others, it was proof that movies had gone mad. When the film premiered, religious groups erupted. Catholic organizations demanded boycotts, claiming it desecrated faith. Newspapers called it the height of vulgarity disguised as religion. The National Board of Review warned studios that such films would invite federal regulation. Behind the scenes, Paramount executives fought off censors across America. Some states refused to screen it entirely, while others demanded more than 30 cuts. DeMille defended his vision, claiming he was exposing moral decay, not glorifying it. But no one bought the argument. Yet the controversy made it a box office triumph. Audiences came to see what they were told not to. Critics were divided. Some praised its grandeur, while others called it depraved. The outrage grew so strong that it became one of the key films used to justify enforcing the production code in 1934. When it was re-released a few years later, DeMille was forced to cut several sequences that were deemed too bold for post-code audiences. Today, The Sign of the Cross stands as a monument to pre-code extravagance, a film that blurred the line between faith and desire and paid the price for daring to show both. Number 5. Trouble in Paradise, 1932. If The Sign of the Cross was scandalous for spectacle, Trouble in Paradise was dangerous for subtlety. Directed by Ernst Lubitsch, this sparkling romantic comedy from Paramount hid its rebellion under a layer of elegance. Herbert Marshall and Miriam Hopkins played sophisticated thieves who fall in love while plotting to rob a perfume heiress played by Kay Francis. The film's charm was razor-sharp. It made crime look beautiful and deception seem romantic. Lubitsch's direction relied on innuendo and timing to create humor that slipped past censors but not the audience. Critics called it daring. Moralists called it poisonous. The Hays office tried to block its release, warning that it glamorized sin and mocked marriage. Paramount fought back, arguing that Lubitsch's touch was refined, not indecent. The studio won temporarily, but the damage was done. When the production code took full effect 2 years later, Trouble in Paradise was banned from re-release until the 1960s. Behind the scenes, Lubitsch was amused by the outrage. He believed intelligence could be more subversive than vulgarity. He told friends that the censors could ban words, but never wit. His actors embraced the same philosophy, turning every glance into suggestion, every pause into tension. Audiences adored it. The film became a critical hit, though certain states refused to screen it. Its elegance masked rebellion, and that made it dangerous. When rediscovered decades later, film historians recognize Trouble in Paradise as one of the most perfect examples of pre-code artistry, a film that proved censorship fears intelligence as much as temptation. Its influence stretched far beyond comedy, shaping how filmmakers learned to hide messages in plain sight. Number 4. Blonde Venus, 1932. Marlene Dietrich was Hollywood's forbidden icon, and Blonde Venus was her ultimate challenge to the system. Directed by Josef von Sternberg, it told the story of Helen Faraday, a devoted wife and mother who enters the world of cabaret to save her husband, then spirals into scandal and exile. From its first scene, audiences knew it wasn't just a drama. It was an emotional storm wrapped in visual poetry. Von Sternberg used shadows, mirrors, and smoke to create a world of desire and despair that few directors dared to attempt. Dietrich glowed like an untouchable goddess, yet every glance carried tragedy. Censors were horrified. They demanded script revisions before filming even began. But von Sternberg ignored them, crafting a story about survival in a world of hypocrisy. When the film opened, state censorship boards from Ohio to Pennsylvania threatened bans. Religious leaders called it immoral, yet audiences couldn't look away. Behind the scenes, production chaos mirrored the story. Paramount executives feared bankruptcy from the controversy, but von Sternberg refused to soften his vision. His collaboration with Dietrich became legendary, an artistic bond that created beauty through defiance. Critics were split. Some called it art, others called it corruption. Newspapers accused the film of destroying American values. Yet years later, Blonde Venus was hailed as one of the most emotionally daring works of the era. Its legacy endures because it captured the moment before silence descended. Dietrich's luminous performance and von Sternberg's bold direction turned rebellion into art. In the end, Blonde Venus was not just a movie. It was a warning that truth and beauty often live where decency fears to look. Number 3. Queen Christina, 1933. By the time Queen Christina reached theaters, Greta Garbo was already a legend. Her mystique defined an entire decade. But this film elevated her from star to myth and nearly got her banned. Directed by Ruben Mamoulian and released by MGM, it told the story of Sweden's 17th-century monarch who defied every expectation placed on a woman of power. Garbo played Christina as a ruler who loved freedom more than conformity. She disguised herself as a man traveled unchaperoned and made decisions that challenged the very concept of royal virtue. The film's tone was tragic yet intimate. It explored identity, loneliness, and the weight of leadership. But what truly set censors ablaze was Garbo's portrayal of independence. She kissed another woman on screen long before Hollywood could tolerate such a moment. When the Hays office reviewed Queen Christina, they panicked. They demanded the studio remove suggestive implications and soften the monarch's character. MGM refused to rewrite Garbo's image. Instead, they promoted her mystery even further. Taglines declared her as both King and Queen of Hearts. The film opened to critical acclaim and audience obsession. Some saw it as art, others as blasphemy. Religious groups in the Midwest called for bans. European critics praised it as a feminist masterpiece decades ahead of its time. Behind the scenes, Garbo controlled her performance entirely. She studied portraits of the real Christina and rewrote several lines herself. Her famous final shot, standing alone on a ship's prow staring into the wind, became an icon of cinematic rebellion. In the years that followed, MGM distanced itself from the controversy, but Queen Christina lived on. Today, it is celebrated for its courage and subtle defiance, a reminder that even in Hollywood's most restrictive era, one actress dared to rule on her own terms. Number 2. I Am a Fugitive from a Chain Gang, 1932. Before censorship silenced outrage, I Am a Fugitive from a Chain Gang exposed a system so brutal that it changed American law. Warner Brothers released this film at the height of the Great Depression. Starring Paul Mooney, it told the true story of Robert Elliott Burns, a veteran wrongfully imprisoned and sentenced to hard labor in the chain gangs of Georgia. The film's realism was staggering. Sweat, mud, and despair filled every frame. Mooney's performance was hauntingly authentic, showing a man stripped of humanity by corruption and cruelty. The final scene, where he vanishes into darkness, whispering "I steal," left audiences gasping. But the backlash came fast. Southern politicians condemned it as a smear against their states. Georgia officials threatened lawsuits. Censors in several regions banned it outright, calling it subversive propaganda. Warner Brothers stood its ground, arguing that truth was not treason. The controversy only fueled ticket sales. Behind the camera, the production faced intimidation. Letters arrived, warning the studio to cancel the release. Some theaters were pressured by local authorities not to screen it. yet the public couldn't resist. The film's power forced national discussion about prison reform. Within 2 years, Georgia quietly began dismantling its chain gang system. The Hayes office hated its political impact, but couldn't deny its artistry. Critics called it one of the most important films ever made. It earned 3 Academy Award nominations and established Warner Bros. As the studio of social conscience. In the years that followed, the production code banned depictions of government corruption that could cause disrespect for institutions. I Am a Fugitive from a Chain Gang became both triumph and warning, a masterpiece that showed how dangerous honesty could be when told on screen. Number 1. Cleopatra, 1934. The last pre-code epic arrived like a farewell to freedom. Cleopatra, directed by Cecil B. DeMille, was released just months before the production code's full enforcement. It starred Claudette Colbert as the infamous Egyptian queen, a woman portrayed not as a villain, but as a strategist, a survivor, and a ruler who used wit as much as beauty. The film overflowed with spectacle. Silk curtains, firelit temples, armies in gold armor. But beneath the grandeur was something more dangerous, a celebration of female power. Colbert's Cleopatra commanded men rather than obeyed them. Her charisma blurred morality, and that terrified censors. When the film premiered in early 1934, moral guardians declared war. Religious groups denounced it as immoral for its opulent scenes and suggestive undertones. Newspapers called for stricter regulation of Hollywood. Within months, the production code was not just suggested, it was law. Behind the scenes, DeMille defended his film as historical art, but studio executives panicked. They ordered immediate compliance with the new censorship standards for all future productions. Cleopatra thus became the last breath of the pre-code era, the final explosion before silence. Audiences loved it. Critics were divided but fascinated. Colbert's performance made her an icon of rebellion cloaked in gold. Historians later called it the film that closed an age, the moment freedom drowned in its own brilliance. Today, Cleopatra stands as both triumph and tombstone, a reminder of what cinema dared to be before fear rewrote the rules. It was beauty, defiance, and danger woven together. The film that ended the party and began the reign of control. These films weren't just entertainment. They were battles between art and authority, between truth and control. Each one paid the price for being too real, too bold, too alive. Which of these pre-code shockers do you think still holds power today? Like, share, and subscribe for more journeys into Hollywood's forbidden history.